we're going to talk about what are some of the absolutely critical things for employers to be doing at the moment in this very challenging world of COVID-19. So we're going to share some insights into that. We're also, so we'll look at the here and now, but also really importantly, we're going to share with you what we see some of the employers starting to do in terms of planning for the future. So to give you some sense of that and what's going on. And so Anne and I are going to be a big part of delivering that piece. And then Siobhan's going to share with you some really useful insights into Levy transfer funds and how to do this and what a really great opportunity it is for organisations. And then we're going to have the opportunity throughout for you to ask questions. So there is a chat functionality in this Zoom session that we are doing. So please, at any point you've got any questions, please just pop those into the chat function. And what we'll do between each of the sections is we'll pick up at least one or two of the questions if we've got time. And then at the end, we'll pick up as many of those questions as we possibly can. If we can't cover all the questions, as well as sharing a recording of this webinar afterwards, we'll also share with you all the questions that were being asked and the respective answers that we weren't able to cover off on this webinar. So we will make sure that every question that you ask today does get answered, even if it's not live on this session. So please, you do use the chat function consistently and regularly throughout this session, and we'll make sure that everything gets answered. So the first session we're going to look at is what's critical for employers to be doing right now. So that's the first area that we're going to tackle. And Anne, if you'd like to get things kicked off.
Of course, yeah. Really important for us all at this time, isn't it, is to think about what's right now, but also what is right and what can we be doing for the future. And I think in the apprenticeship world, the government has been really clear that they want us to maintain apprentices in learning, regardless of whether they've been furloughed, whether they're still working, or even whether their job roles have changed. So to do that, we're very lucky that we've got a good range of providers in the sector who have been very agile in moving to remote learning. And what that's enabling us as employers, companies to do is actually use that technology to get apprentices on programme, maintain their motivation, keep them progressing. And in our particular case, we've actually had 2 apprentices this week that have passed their endpoint assessment. So we're trying to keep it business as usual in terms of those that are on programme. Communication is really key. And what we're seeing, Siobhan and myself, is that we have a range of different apprenticeships, different ages, different types of programmes. And the communication that we're able to put in place is different. Some of it is driven by the apprentices themselves. But what really is key is the fact that it's about their well-being and their safety and their security in this remote learning and this remote working environment. So it's important that actually as a business, you've got those systems set up, you know how to do that. If you're furloughing staff, then perhaps you're not using the company email address. So perhaps making sure that your providers know the personal email address of the apprentices so that you can still carry on working with them. But I think it is that ability to flex, to move into new working arrangements and make them work for you. But also at this time, it's a good time for apprentices to be maximising any downtime onto their apprenticeship so they can get more learning done now while perhaps they're quieter than when you're going to need them, which is later in the year. So I think, you know, those are some of the things that I certainly recommend at this point in time.
Fantastic, Anne. So the clear message I'm getting there is actually, ironically, there's a real opportunity to do a lot in and around apprenticeships at the moment, whether that's accelerating their learning, really upping the level of support that they get, making them feel more engaged, and maximising this time rather than thinking it's a step backwards.
Absolutely. And don't forget, the apprentices are fantastic role models for other members of staff as well. And the fact that they are still achieving, they're still being productive, and models out really nicely for other employees. And I think it will encourage them to take up apprenticeships where they might have put them off.
Fantastic. So if we, sorry, periodically the slides just start, here we go. So I just want to share with you some of the ways that you can use technology to support your apprenticeships. And at Micro Future and at Pearson, we're really passionate about technology being a force for good it really being helped to make things happen. And some of the ways that we're seeing organisations use it during this really challenging time is to keep connected with their people. So through the digital mentors that we have on the platform, or digital buddies, so it enables them to connect with people like them. Module content, so bite-sized chunks of learning to really support their ongoing learning. And with those modules, we get feedback on how useful they find the modules and how effective they are and who's using them and who's not. So it's a really great tool, as well as being able to support with learning and to support with that engagement and connect and staying connected. Because it's through technology, it enables you to track engagement levels of all your apprentices, so you can actually get a sense and a feel for how engaged they are, what's important to them, what are they worried about, what are they thinking about, and that whole them feeling safe and secure that Anne mentioned earlier is a really powerful way to do that. And because obviously it's technology, you can track engagement levels and all that kind of good stuff. So really powerful, useful use of opportunity to use technology to really support what you're doing. Good technology should be agile and flexible, and just as an example, so, our technology platform has been very much used to support apprentices, but actually we've repivoted it recently to use it to support all staff on furlough. So for organizations who are furloughing their staff, they're using Connector to stay connected with their furloughed people, to keep supporting their furloughed people, and make them feel an important part of their organisation, because all of us need to be preparing for the future, which obviously we'll be talking about in a few moments. So there's lots of technology platforms out there. This is just an example, and this is our platform at My Kind of Future, but the use of technology, and particularly cloud-based and first mobile, which our platform is definitely the growing trend in the HR space. It's the cloud-based platforms and first mobile platforms. So technology, a really important part of how we're seeing companies respond to the challenges that we're in, and highly likely what we're going to be looking at in the future. So Anne, do you want to talk, again, we've touched on this a little bit about but the importance of protecting and supporting your talent during this time?
Yeah, absolutely. I've just seen a chat come in, which would be useful if we just picked up on that at a later point. But yeah, I mean, we've all invested heavily in our staff. They are a major resource for us. And one of the things I think at this point in time is to protect that talent, is to make sure that they feel that we are working with them, that we're investing in them. And the apprenticeship is a fantastic way to do that. It's about putting them at the heart of what we're doing. It's about making sure that they are still being productive, even in a different working environment. And I'm finding training providers, with the expertise that they've got, are really important at this time. They're an extra source of support and expertise that the apprentices and their line managers actually can tap into. So I think from my perspective, it's about investing in those people. We're actually doing away with cohorts for our internal staff. We're inviting external staff to start their apprenticeship whenever it's right for them, so we can start immediately. Our providers are a lot more agile to bring apprentices on programme quickly, apart from degree apprenticeships, where obviously you've still got the academic year. We're using transfer of funds, which Siobhan will talk about a little later, in encouraging those that are in the smaller businesses, in supply chains, to look at perhaps people that they might not have thought about before of coming on to an apprenticeship, because now is a good time. I think if you do have some downtime in your employees, they can fill that with the apprenticeship content. I mean, as we know, it's 20% off the job, but it could be more than that at this time. It really doesn't matter. They can speed up that part. I think the other thing that I would say too is about keeping up to speed with what's happening within the government world, legislation, regulations, financial support. There's a lot of really good guidance coming out from professional bodies as to how you can maximise this opportunity and how to work with your providers. I was on a webinar just earlier this morning where we were talking to careers advice people in schools. they need a huge amount of help in terms of preparing the year 11s, the year 12s for moving into this new world. And we were talking about, virtual assessment centres. That's a scary thing for young people, but it's still something that as employers we could be doing so that we're in a really good position come September. So I think, yes, it's definitely the focusing on your staff as talent, and how do you keep that talent ticking over so you're in a good position to put it into practice properly when your business is going to need it.
Fantastic, thank you, Anne. So I think there's a number of kind of themes there that are coming through, really. One is, the importance of communication with your apprentices, whether they're on furlough or not. It's going to be a really unsettling time for them. So the importance of really good quality comms, maintaining that support. It's definitely an opportunity to be really active with your apprentices in terms of their learning. As we all will, I'm sure, know, delivering apprenticeship training while on furlough does not contravene furlough rules. So it's definitely an opportunity to do that. The use of technology, and agile technology to support your apprentices and all your staff, obviously, whether they're on furlough or not, to be giving them regular comms and regular updates, and to give them the opportunity to engage and ask questions themselves. So lots of good stuff that can be done in the here and now. Hannah, it sounded like from what Anne said, there's been a couple of questions. So Hannah, do you want to just cover off one of those questions that Anne and I can pick up?
Absolutely. So yeah, we've had a couple of questions come in. I think they're really interesting ones. So I'll start at the top. So some companies, Ian asked this question, some companies are adhering to the strict furlough guidelines and not using work emails with furloughed staff, but how can I stay connected?
Yeah, that is a really good question, and it's one that we hit just a couple of weeks ago. Fortunately, our training providers, when they enrolled our apprentices, took a note of their home phone numbers or their mobile phone numbers and their personal email addresses. And because the provider had asked the question, they were perfectly within their right to contact the apprentices. We also did it through the line managers of the apprentices as well, where they are allowed to reach out to just check they were okay with the provider to get in touch. So we have also asked the provider to speak to our apprentices and say, look, are you happy to use your email address, your work email address, to keep in touch with us so that you can join our apprenticeship webinars, our apprenticeship activities. And also, please feel free to carry on with your apprenticeship. Our providers are also keeping us very much in the loop about how those apprentices are doing. What's really critical for Siobhan and myself is that those apprentices still feel they're very much part of us, part of the family, part of what we're doing. So it is tricky, but it's not impossible, and the providers are fantastic in actually being able to make contact with those apprentices for you if you followed it to the letter and not using your company email addresses.
Fantastic, thanks, Anne. And again, just to add to that, I mentioned earlier about the technology that you can use. So our technology platform connector is being used by organisations to stay connected with their furloughed people, particularly when you're talking about big numbers. So again, technology definitely a really important tool to be using to stay connected, to stay informed, but also really importantly to track engagement levels. So I think that's a really important part of what you want from your technology, is that ability to track the levels of engagement that you have, whether it's with your furloughed staff or with your staff that's working from home. But tracking that engagement is absolutely key. Do we have time for another question, Hannah, or do we need to move on?
Yep, we've got a few more minutes, and we have a really good one here from Becky. And she asks, how do we continue the learning journey after the apprenticeship has been completed? Many apprentices struggle to find their next steps after an intense period of learning and support, and don't always have the best line managers to support to develop them further. Should apprenticeships include a compulsory personal development module to enable future progression?
Thanks, Hannah. Anne, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, a very, very good question. I mean, it's something that we built into our programme right from day one, actually, because we didn't see the apprenticeship as just being a static part of their development. It was just a tool and a route way to get to something else. Might be right for some and maybe not right for others. So what we've always built in is the provider. So we're an employer, not an employer provider. So we use 16 different providers to work with our various apprenticeship needs across the business. And there is always that exit interview, but it's an exit interview that includes the apprentice and the line manager about what potentially is next. And sometimes it's about embedding more than it is about doing something differently. Sometimes it's also about using short, sharp learning that they can access through our internal L&D offer and not another apprenticeship. We also have our HR business partners. We're lucky, you know, we're a big company. We tap into that expertise. So again, we very much communicate with them when somebody is coming to the end of their program to say, you know, what is the right thing? Could you engage in a conversation with the line manager and the learner? Because you're right, some line managers are not as equipped as others to have that conversation. We also have the annual performance review process, which I'm sure most companies have, if not all. And we encourage the apprenticeship to be a key development goal for all of the apprentices. So it's something that's discussed at progress review between the provider, the manager and the apprentice, constantly monitoring that. So ultimately, when they get towards the end of the apprenticeship, that plan should really be looking as a clear indicator as to what's going to happen next. What's the next goal? What's the next business objective that apprentice is going to be part of? So a variety of different tools, some that big businesses have, some that other businesses maybe don't, but have in a different way. But ultimately, if you have the joy of a provider, tap into them.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, for some of the smaller employers, in my experience, actually hooking onto those review meetings, really making use of that line manager engagement you have at that time and the resources of that training provider in terms of some of the personal development tools they might be able to offer smaller organisations, then that's really a good time to kind of get the engagement throughout at those sort of 12 weekly intervals, so it's not left to the end and it's continuously having that conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Siobhan. Thanks, Anne. And yeah, I think the other piece that dawns on me, just as you were both talking there, is, you know, let's keep reminding ourselves about, you know, why we have apprenticeships in our organisation, why we've introduced them, why we've grown the volume of apprenticeships. You know, there will be really important strategic reasons why we do this, and you know, future skills is a really important one. So you know, reminding ourselves of why we're doing this. You know, it really isn't just about getting our levy money back. It's about far more than that at a strategic level. So it's being really clear about why have we got apprenticeships coming into our organisation, and because that should really feed into what the next steps are in terms of as they come to the end of their apprenticeship. Hannah, have we got time for another one, or do we need to move on?
I think we have time for just one more. What is the best way to ensure the learner completes their apprenticeship rather than looking for the next best thing and often stopping their apprenticeship for a new role, higher pay, etc.?
Okay, I mean, that's something that we do have happen a fair bit in Pearson. I'm happy to say that a lot of our apprentices go for internal roles, get promoted, or have changes to their job roles. And what we do there, and again, we do it right at the very front end of the programme when we're in doing induction with the apprentices and induction with the line managers, is just to say, make sure that when you go for a role, you talk about the apprenticeship that you're currently doing, and make sure that the hiring manager, or potentially your new manager, is happy to support you to continue it. If the new job role isn't appropriate for you to continue the current apprenticeship, then we would have a look at the new job role description to see whether we could move to another apprenticeship and maybe, you know, recognition of prior learning. So in most cases, I'm just trying to think, but pretty much in every case actually, the apprentices have gone for roles where they know they can carry on with their apprenticeship. And the new line manager has, even though they might have not done any work with apprentices before, have been very open and supportive. And Siobhan and I always have a meeting with the new line manager to run through some of the headline elements of it before they do a 3-part induction.
Fantastic.
I think, Simon, you touched on it as well around selling the kind of strategic benefits to the business so that everyone's sort of on board across the organisation. It's slightly harder when they leave to go externally, but we still kind of support them to complete their apprenticeships with providers if we can't, you know, finish them within Pearson's.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that big picture, isn't it, Siobhan? That's what's really important. Is what, you know, arguably the apprenticeship itself is not the end result. It's where they go on to from there, and the impact they have within the organisation, and how much more valuable they become as employees, and impact all that kind of stuff. That's why we're doing this at its heart. I'm conscious we probably need to move on. So let's move on to, so we've covered off some questions. So let's move on. So now what we're going to do is look forward a little bit. So how are we seeing employers plan for the future? Arguably, who knows what exactly the future is going to look like. So with that caveat in mind, what are some of the practical things that we see happening? Because we want to share that with you, because I'm sure lots of you are at different stages of your journey in terms of what's going on with COVID-19 and the future. But we thought it'd be really useful to share some of the things that we're seeing employers start to plan for it as we look into the future. So, Anne, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, of course. I just noticed a question about furloughing. So if I could just touch on that first. We've had a situation where a candidate was furloughed, and we did put them on an apprenticeship, and that is perfectly allowable, as is supporting apprentices to continue with their learning. So that was just a quick one there. Yeah, I mean, what we're doing and how we've changed our work is that we're actually very much focusing on apprentices feeling part of the organisation when they're working in such a different way now. You know, for some of our apprentices, they're very new, they're pretty fresh from school in some cases. We had 2 that actually started their job and then were remote working that very day, so they've never even seen the office yet. So it's a very difficult time for those apprentices particularly. So Siobhan and I have put together a more comprehensive version of what we already had. We've always had a learner voice strategy with a number of different ways that we communicate internally and externally. And we've tightened that up, and we've added some different things to it. So we do a weekly check-in call with the apprentices, and it's literally a bit of an update for them on how things are going, what we're hearing, finding out how things are going with them. It's also acting as a bit of a network. So they're beginning to see other apprentices in other parts of the business and realising they're possibly doing the same apprenticeship as them. So they're making contact as a result of that. We have a group of apprenticeship ambassadors that we have put in place for the last 3 years. They're now becoming a lot more proactive, actually, and are creating activities for the apprentices on their sites. And actually next week, we're running a bit of a pilot where Siobhan is going to run what we call a time to talk cafe. And it's a fun thing with cakes and tea, where we literally pick the brains of our apprentices on some of the ideas we have for improvements to the programme, to see if they like it, if they want to do any changes. We're going to pilot that with the ambassadors, who will then facilitate that out into the rest of the business. So we're just trying to do things in a remote way. We're also doing a lot of comms into the business around apprenticeships too, in saying, you know, we're not waiting for cohorts, we're now saying it's roll on, roll off, guiding our HR business partners around the business to say, you know, look at people, what they're doing. Is there an opportunity for them perhaps to do something like this? And I think that sends some very positive messages. It shows that actually we're thinking about our future skills for the business, because we are very much thinking about the future. We're a big business, so as you can imagine, because we're in the education learning business, things have changed an awful lot in the UK. So we've got people that are working in some parts of the business, actually their skills could support other bits. That's exciting, because they're developing their personal profile within the business, and their skills are going to be much more improved. So for us, it's about targeting how we want to plan and work with the individuals in the business, because we know that post what we've got going on, we're going to need those skills. So for example, technology is definitely coming up as a key one. Project management's another one. So we are already starting to target those particular areas, and hoping that we'll get some internal people that come through who are perhaps looking to expand their skill set in that, and then be better prepared for the roles that we know are going to be coming through in September. We are also thinking about the recruitment side of things. So even though we're not actively recruiting, we're thinking about where those roles could be, how that might look, because obviously it could be virtual assessment centres for a few months yet. We're talking to schools, we're doing a little bit of work with some of our schools and some of our partners as well, into some of the charities, local authorities we work with, so that we're still out there talking to our potential apprentices that might come through to us as candidates for later in the year. So it's different, but it's still very much got a lot of momentum to it. So we're not stalling, we're not stopping, it's just different.
Great stuff. Thanks, Anne. And just to go on to build on from that a little bit in terms of what we're seeing happening in this space. So as you touched on there, Anne, in terms of the recruitment process, so those organisations that are still recruiting, so they've got candidates in the process. There's a really important, one of really critical areas we're seeing is because recruitment processes are sometimes being extended, either while companies repurpose what was face-to-face assessment to digital, and or making decisions about what they're looking to do. The recruitment process is extending, but also potential start dates are uncertain or being pushed out. So we know for some apprentices and grads, for example, normal start dates of September have already been pushed out to January. So there's a really important piece about how to stay engaged with that talent that you've lined up to join your business, and the importance of keeping them engaged, lots of communication for them so they know what's going on, lots of insight, but also what can you start to do to kind of build their skills and their knowledge of the business, so when they do land in the business, whenever that point is, they get off to a really big running start. So that's a big focus. With those digital and virtual assessment centres that Anne alluded to, I think what's really important there is what you do ahead of it. So tests with the candidates to make sure that the technology you're using they can use, and making sure they're really well supported in advance of it and they're prepared for it. So supporting candidates ahead of it is going to be key, because if you're still looking to recruit, you still want to get these people through your process. So giving them that support so they can prepare to do it digitally is really important, as well as making sure the technology works. Something else we talk a lot about is not necessarily always having technology that's always on. What we've got to consider when people are working from home is they may be sharing bandwidth in their home with other family members or parents who are working. They may be sharing technology. So in terms of how you're designing and creating your virtual assessments, your digital work experience, not having it the need for them always to be online for all of it, but for them to be able to take stuff offline that they can work on, then come back online, is a really important part of how to successfully bring digital work experience, digital assessment to life. And also, again, as Anne alluded to, in terms of engaging with talent and attracting talent with a view to potentially next year's activity. And clearly, schools and colleges are closed at the moment. Who knows when they'll reopen? I know that, for example, I know today is about apprenticeships, but in the university space, they're already doing contingency planning for web-based careers fairs, and because they're worried they won't be able to do big-scale face-to-face events. So there's lots of stuff to think about in terms of how can we really engage with talent in a really effective way when we can't get in front of them. And again, for a lot of the organizations we work in my kind of future, our technology platform Connector has done exactly that. It prepares candidates for assessment days, which improves conversion rates. It helps connect all the people that you kind of come into contact with digitally with your organization, so they stay sort of in your talent pool and you don't lose them. So really, really important that a real big focus that we're seeing, to kind of summarize really, is about making sure that the technology is usable at the time it needs to be used by the individuals, and thinking about what planning for digital engagement, higher levels of digital engagement than previously done, that's still engaging, and you can still interact. So these digital mentors, the bite-sized chunks of learning and insight that you're giving them, so ways that that individuals are feeling invested in, are developing their skills, building their confidence. Again, as Anne mentioned earlier, particularly for school leavers, being recruited into organisations starting an apprenticeship is a scary time. And not being able to do it face to face makes it even harder. So the support that you give them is super critical, and really good interactive, engaging technology is going to be critical for the success of that. So that was what I wanted to kind of share on that piece. So we've got some time for some questions before we hand over to Siobhan to talk about levy transfer. So Hannah, any key questions for us to pick up before we move on to talk about levy transfer?
Yeah, we've got one from James, who asks, I've heard some sectors are lobbying government to have a pause on the levy. What is your view on that?
I'll start with.
Yeah,
my view is absolutely no. I understand why some employers are thinking about that, because there's possibly a concern that when it's remote learning, are you getting your money's worth? But if we pause the levy, then what we do is we stop that continuity for the apprentice, and if they're furloughed, they're at home then. What are they doing with their time? And we need to prepare for the future. But also it's about the sector too. If we pause what we do with our providers, then the cash flow goes. It's very clear, and we heard something out of the government yesterday, that there isn't going to be at this time any additional support for independent training providers, who make up the majority of deliverers in the sector. So we've really got to keep the motivation going. We've got to keep the apprenticeship going. Only use break in learning when it's absolutely essential for the well-being of the apprentice.
Thanks, Anne.
Great. And so I'm conscious of time, Hannah. Is there another question we've got time for, or shall we hand over to Siobhan?
I think for time, we'll hand over to Siobhan for now. We can come back to questions in a second.
Fantastic. So Siobhan, over to you.
Thanks, Simon. I'm aware that some of you on the webinar may be new to the apprenticeship arena and using the apprenticeship levy to develop your future talent. And I would actually say it's a great time to think about apprenticeships and to make use of the funding that is available. Just to give you a little bit of background on that. So the apprenticeship levy and transfer of funds facility was introduced back in 2017. It was introduced with a vision of creating long-term sustainable funding for apprenticeships and to give more control to employers. I think for a long time there'd been a call to government to sort of revamp apprenticeships and to give more control to industry and employers. And by introducing the levy and the transfer of funds facility, they did give more control over the funding and how it's spent and the quality of how the apprenticeships are designed as well to employers, which I think has been accepted in the sector as being a really good thing. Effectively a tax on large employers. The levy is paid for monthly by large employers with a wage for over 3 million, and for large organisations such as Pearson's, ourselves, this can be quite a sizable chunk of funding available for apprenticeship training. And it has a lifespan of 24 months, and given that large employers do have excess funding that they cannot use in the time that they have, or they may make a strategic decision that they want to support other organisations to widen participation in apprenticeships. And I know that we've looked at this in supporting other employers, that we would like to offer it out to employers who work with 16 to 18-year-olds and in community settings around the country where we operate as a business. So we looked at kind of working with employers to tap into that funding so that they can utilise it for younger people and community projects across the country. In terms of tapping into apprenticeship money and why you should do that now, I mean, now has been a time for everyone to sort of pause and look at their business. There's a financial saving to be made by using the transfer of funds facility. A lot of people might not know that if you engage through the training provider route, there's actually a cost, an employer contribution of 5% that employers have to make towards the apprenticeship training. If you engage via the transfer of funds facility, that is waived. So there's no cost to you for the training assessment of your apprenticeships. So financial saving, it's a great time to plan your skills needs for your business. And I think we're finding as a business and talking to some of the transfer of funds employers that we work with, it has been a time for them to really look at their skills needs now and post COVID-19. You know, we're moving into more remote kind of working, agile working. What does that mean for their business? What skills do they need? And Pearson made a strategic decision at the very outset in 2017 that they would use the levy to upskill their existing staff. And it's a really good time now to look at the skills that you need within your business and how you can use the levy to upskill your staff. We're also seeing, and from conversations that Anne and I have had with some other big employers and small employers this morning, that recruitment hasn't gone on hold. You know, people are looking at where they're going after we get back to some sort of normality. And if you are recruiting for new roles, maybe test the water. Is apprenticeship something that you've thought about? They've always kind of been in your mind, but you've just never really had the time to think about them. Now really is a good time because there's over 500 apprenticeship standards available. And I think that's always, you know, quite alarming to some people because they still have a traditional view of the number of apprenticeships and types of apprenticeships that are available. So we will put a link at the end to the appendix on the slides for the Institute of Apprenticeship and Technical Education, where you can go to find out some further information about the 500 standards that are available, and there's more in development. So there is a wide range of apprenticeship standards to fit with the roles for any business. Another thing we found at Pearson is leadership and management apprenticeships are something that as a business we strategically decided to go down that route. And often people also forget that they might be available at the higher end of the qualification levels. So they are available from level 2 to level 7. And we made a strategic decision as a business to look at the leadership and management apprenticeship standards that are available, from the team leader supervisor at level 3 right up to the senior leader degree at level 7. So it's another thing about whether or not you have new roles or upskilling opportunities that you can use some of those leadership and management apprenticeship standards that are available. In terms of the mechanics, I'll just, Simon, if you can just move it on to the next slide. It is a relatively simple process, the mechanics, and I won't go through every point on this diagram, but effectively, you would have an idea of the number of apprentices that you would like supported in terms of funding and the apprenticeship standards. And like I said, that can range from anything from these 500 that are available on retail or construction. It really can vary on what you need funding for. Once you have that offline discussion about the numbers of apprenticeships, the funding is quite easily to be calculated because it's a funding band that's attached to each of the apprenticeship standards. So that cost can be worked out quite simply. There would be a conversation probably around the duration of how long you want to deliver the apprenticeships over. And that would depend on the sort of model that you might have in mind with a training provider and when you're thinking of starting the apprentices. So that the calculation can be worked out if the sending employer can support that and you at that time. From there, the receiving company would need to set up an apprenticeship service account. Again, a relatively simple and easy thing to do, and there's YouTube videos online on how to do that. And the apprenticeship service helpline is open daily from 8 AM to 8 PM. And of the 10 providers that employers that we're supporting at the moment, this has been a really quick and easy exercise. There's been no problems in getting the ID set up very quickly. And from there, it really is keeping the conversation going about when you found a training provider that you're happy with, who can meet the needs of the skills that you want developed with a delivery model that suits your business. We're finding that more and more people are probably going to go down the remote route now that providers are set up to do that. But it also still makes sense to have some of that face-to-face contact and some of the practical skills and workshop delivery. So once you decide on a training provider that works for you and the timescales that you want to work with, the link is made from the either the employer or from the training provider to send the approval link to us as the sending employer, and that starts the funding mechanism on a monthly basis, and the apprentice seamlessly starts the training and it's paid for every month as seamless as that. Really, it's a really simple exercise. At Pearson, we have, we offer a lot of support to our receiving employers, and we do ask for a quarterly catch-up call where we sort of have a conversation about how things are going and forecast any future funding that might be available, or that the receiving employer might want. If things are going really well, they might want to put more apprentices through at that time. And I think at this time, we're saying support the sector. If you are looking to recruit apprentices, transfer of funds might be one option for you, because it means that there's no financial cost to yourself as a business. And there are lots of sending employers, large employers out there, who are willing to support widening participation at this time. So it's definitely a good time and a good opportunity to start those conversations. And we will put a link also to the apprenticeship service who can help with matching you with large employers who have the mechanisms at the moment to help smaller businesses through transferring funds.
Siobhan, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for that whistle-stop tour of.
I know, it's a lot to cover in 5 minutes, but yeah, this diagram will obviously be on the slides and it breaks it down into a bit more detail. But I wanted to just kind of get across the message that, there is support out there, and it is a simple exercise. So we're here to help.
Fantastic. And I think that visual sums up, it's not as complicated as people think. So Siobhan, thank you. Conscious of time, so Hannah, let's see what questions there are that we can pick up.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a couple come through. So this one is from Jen, and she asks, how do you go about selecting the right training providers for you? How do you measure their performance?
Let me just answer that one for you. As a big levy paying employer, we, as I said, work with so many different providers that what we do in the first instance is just pass that information on to the receiving employer, those providers that would be able to do the job for them. What we can't do is, help them through the procurement process. Well, we do actually give a few templates out, for example, but it's up to the receiving employer to decide who they want, but at least we can give them a starter for 10. It's always good to go and have a look at an Ofsted report if they've had an Ofsted or a monitoring visit. Reputation. Another way that we've done it for bringing our own in is to actually contact the endpoint assessment organisation who does the last bit to say, which providers are you working with that you're finding the most proactive and the most engaged with you. So there's a variety of different ways, but your sending employer, i.e. the one where you're going to get your money from, is your first port of call, because they'll be able to give you some insights.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anne. Any more, Hannah?
And just finally, Will asks, how time consuming is this for me as an employer to undertake?
I can take that one, I think, yeah. I mean, it really isn't a time consuming process. From a transfer of funds point of view, the conversation can be had offline. Large employers will have, the information to hand about how much funding they have available. As Anna said, they will often have sort of templates, and they can advise you on some of the big kind of players in the market and who they may have done due diligence and checks on. But we would often say, go and have a look at the Ofsted report, maybe speak to some other customers and the endpoint assessment organisation. If you don't have a big HR department, the recruitment can be handled as well by those training providers using the apprenticeship site. There's companies like My Kind of Futures out there that can also kind of help with apprentices and recruitment. So it really doesn't have to be a timely thing. Usually I'd say it fits with your recruitment model, and just topping and tailing at either end, you probably have to allow a week or two for onboarding with the apprenticeship training provider to get the training set up.
Fantastic. Thanks, Siobhan. Hannah, any other questions before Anna and I just summarise and wrap up?
I think that's it. Thank you, Simon.
Fantastic. Anne, so do you want to just summarise quickly and then I'll wrap things up?
Yeah, I think in summary, now is the time to do the planning and the work so that you can reap the rewards later on. Invest in that talent now. You've most often not got time to work on apprenticeships now than perhaps at the time in the future. So, maximise this opportunity. Think about what it is you want in terms of talent going forward, but really think about your existing staff too and what development they need.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anne. And I think the key reflection from me, just reflecting on the questions and on what's been talked about, I'd absolutely endorse everything that Anne said. I think now is definitely a fantastic, it is an opportunity. I know the world is tough and challenging at the moment, but there's definitely an opportunity to do some really good stuff here. when it comes to apprentices. Keep reminding yourself about why your organisation, each of your organisations will have had very clear strategic reasons why apprenticeships are important to them, and that should be the driving force behind everything else that you do, sort of behind it and on the back of it. So do remind yourself of those key drivers, whether it was future skills, whether it was an aging workforce, whether it was diversity, whether it were, whatever those reasons were, retaining your staff, developing your staff, all those kinds of things. We know you don't have to go far in the media when talking about businesses to talk about the importance of your people. What you're doing for your people now is going to be absolutely critical to the speed with which we all recover from the challenge that COVID-19 has brought every organisation across the globe and every person across the globe. So that the work we do now is really going to help us and our organisations get back to strength as quickly as possible, and our people are going to be key to that. So how we support our people, how we keep our people engaged. I read something recently about, it's almost impossible to over communicate at the moment. People are scared, they're uncertain, they're worried, they hear all kinds of different things. So the importance of our organisations being really clear about the importance of apprenticeships and why it's important and what that commitment is, and then backing that up with actions. So in the way that you engage and support your existing apprentices, in the way that you engage and support the new apprentices that you're either going through the process for at the moment or looking to bring in, and how technology can support you, because it's clear right now technology is absolutely critical, but there is also no doubt that post-COVID-19 it's going to be a different world. How much of a different world it is, who knows, but it is going to be different, and there is no doubt the role of technology is going to be stronger. So making sure we've got really great technology that's supporting us to support our people is going to be the key to, as they bouncing back effectively, which I'm sure we'll all do in the months to come.